and welcome to the Real Life Theology podcast. I am your host, Regan Gibbs. This season of Real Life Theology is called Faith on Call, and during the season, I am interviewing different Christian leaders across the nation to bring us biblical wisdom and insight based off of their leadership experience. Today's episode is with Matt Reagan. Welcome to the podcast, Matt. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm kind of excited. It's the Reagan and Reagan podcast today,
right?
So I'm feeling pretty good about that. My name is Matt Reagan. I have been father of 5, which is a big deal. I've been in ministry for 26 years now, and have loved every second of it. And spend a lot of my time, Matt, your dad and I were talking about love, investing in next generation leaders. So I'm excited about this.
Cool.
But I've been at Southeast Christian Church for 18 years. And before that, I was at Eastview Christian Church in Bloomington, Illinois for 7 years. It was a great place. Love both of them. They've meant the world to me and part of my story. So.
Cool. Well, thank you for joining us today. We have a couple of questions to ask you so that, people can kind of get some biblical insight and some Christian leadership wisdom from other people who have been doing it a whole lot longer. So my first question, just to start us off, is what led you to pursue a career in ministry? Has this been sort of like a lifelong goal or something that just happened?
So I would say, like most people like me, and when it comes to ministry, I think and I'll get to the multiple ways I think God calls, but I think for me it started, what really started was I had a church that had space. Mm-hmm. So not only do I remember from the time I was younger, there was always a church that always made room for me. Like they never felt like I was a distraction. Mm-hmm. They were always, I got to see the real thing quickly. But then as I got older, they just kept saying, hey, would you think about coming early? And would you think about serving? And would you think about, and I was always like, I don't know, man, I'm kind of a bum. I don't think I know anything. But I don't think I can do anything. But I even remember our children's pastor at Kingsway Christian Church in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I remember I was helping with VBS, old school vacation Bible school during the week, and she invited me in, and I was helping, and she said, "Do you have any creative ideas?" And at that time they were like acting out the stories or anything. I was like, it'd be really cool would be if we did this in black light. And she was like, and she was like, what would it take to do that? And I was like, I don't know. I think they have lights. And so she's like, you know what? Let's give it a shot.
Yeah.
And I was like, are you serious? I'm 17 years old. Right. You are not supposed to let me do this.
Right.
And so I'm telling you, me and a couple of my friends stayed up at the church. We're spray painting faces. And we did the whole, we did the whole first day of acting in black lights, and the kids went nuts.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it wasn't as cool as we thought it was. But then she was like, why don't we do that every day? And so she just let me try and let me lead and let me serve. And I remember being a senior in high school and the youth pastor grabbing me and saying, hey, man, what would you think about, helping me lead the junior high and sort of letting me in? And so I would say having a church that didn't think I was the future, like, one day you're going to be great at leading the church. Right. They were like, hey, I think you should be in the church, and here's your spot. Yeah. And so that was huge for me. But I would say, I think I hear people talk about calling all the time. I think sometimes the need is the call. I think for a lot of my people that I know and love, they couldn't imagine, at some point, they couldn't imagine working a day job. Right. Where it wasn't about the kingdom. Right. Yeah. And they know, and we need tons of business leaders and all that, but they're like, I can't do it, man. Like there's too much need. There's too much on the table. And so sometimes the need is the call. For me, it was my senior year. I was at a retreat, and maybe because the Lord knew that I never would have thought I was good enough for it, which is, some of my past stuff. But I was out in the woods and I was walking, I was praying as a senior, and I just felt as clearly as God speaks to me, which I know that can be, whatever. Sometimes, it can be the tacos. But I just felt like Lord said, Matt, I've always planned for you to be in ministry. And in that thought hit my mind, and I just started weeping. I was like, there's no way, man. I would be a terrible pastor. Right. But I really felt like he said that to me. And so I went and told my youth pastor. He started crying. He had actually been praying for me for a while that would be the case. Wow. And so then I was like, what do you do? Like, he's like, all these things called Bible colleges. Literally, I'm like, I don't know what that is, man. Like, I have no clue. Any of this stuff, like, this was not my world. Like, I grew up, in an inner city project. So, but yeah, the call kind of, I would say it came and I would say almost a discernible voice.
Yeah.
But I would say what laid the foundation was a church that was like, nope.
Right.
We got room for you. Come on, man. Let's go.
I love that.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I love when, like leaders get on and share interactions within the church where, as a younger person or as a young leader, they were empowered to be able to lead and serve. And something I always have been appreciative of for our church is that, like you said, it wasn't like a one day kind of thing. Like we were empowered to serve at a young age. And I wish that more churches were already doing this, because I think that something I'm seeing as a young adult and through my young adult friends and just young Christians today is that because they didn't have that connectivity in a church that was empowering them to lead, it was a one day kind of thing. They just leave and try to be a Christian leader or Christian influencer, but have nothing to do with the church. Yeah. And that's kind of a really dangerous path to be on, because there's no accountability. 100%. And that's been something that I've had to navigate and have conversations about, that I'm kind of like, had there been that empowerment, it would have looked a lot different for some people. Yeah. So
that's good.
You said you work with students, young people. You have some kids who are Gen Z aged. How do you see Gen Z's approach to faith and the church differing from other generations?
Yeah, it's so funny, because I have 5 kids, and I have right now they're 21, 19, 17, 14, and 8. And I think what I've seen, and I love it, is they're way more they're quicker to a yes than I did student ministry for a long time. They're quicker to say yes. They're quicker to evangelize and tell their friends. And they're quicker to think outside of the box. And I think, for example, like my boys, gosh, it's been years ago, but my sophomore in college was a freshman and my son was a junior. And they came to me and they were like, Dad, we need help. I was like, what's up, man? And they were like, so here's the deal. My friends don't want to come to church, man. And the night that it's on, they have football or they have this. And I was like, okay, well, what do you... And this is one of the things I love about this generation. What do you guys think we should do? And they're like, I don't know. I was like, well, let's pray about it and let's circle up. So we circle up the next day, and just so you know, my Fridays are my day off. And they're like, so we got this idea, and you know where this is going. I'm like, okay. And they're like, we feel like we should do this breakfast for our friends. And so here's the thing: like, mom can fix some food. We'll make sure to invite and to bring them and to know their names and like all that kind of stuff. And if you'll just do a little Bible study and like help us get it rolling, we think that's it. And I'm like, I don't know, man, a Bible study in the morning, that feels like a terrible idea. And they're like, they can't say no because there's no athletics. There's nothing that's in the way. So we're just going to try it. And I was like, I'm literally like hesitant. Yes. Thinking this will be done in a month. 4 years later, 50 to 60 kids at my house every single week. And, dozens and dozens of them have come to Christ. And now, so many of those young men are like our kids and they're off. And we are now watching, my son's friends, parents, and other kids coming to Christ left and right. Wow. And I'm just kind of humbled because they thought outside of the box. It was on their heart to do it. They just needed a little help. Right. And I would say that's probably true for this generation. I feel like they don't want to come if you do it all. Yeah. Which I kind of like, if I'm being honest. Yeah. But they do, they want to be the real deal. They want to be like, and so if they're all in, they're all in. They will tell everybody on the planet. I'm just watching. So then I started watching, all their friends come to Christ. And them too. It wasn't just my kids. Like, I spend so much of my time helping them run Bible studies in their colleges and universities because they're like, I got to tell everybody else about it. It's just, they're evangelistic like the boomer generation. And I just don't think we've seen it like this before, but they do need help. And so, I love them. They're the best.
I think that's very wise. I think that's some good insight. And we talked about on last season of this podcast, I had on 2 worship leaders from different local churches. And we were just having a discussion. They're both Gen Z aged, but they are, young married men who have been put in positions of leadership, leading worship at their churches. And we kind of got into the discussion about different generations having different preferences as far as worship, and like how some older generations want traditional and that's it. And how some like the Gen X millennial age, I know my mom's like this, only want like the high tech, like almost EDM concert worship setup. And like, because they see like how cool tech can be, and that's what they want. But we were talking about like with our generation, like we don't care as long as it's real, right? Like anything that I show up to, I don't care if it's completely stripped back, if we have like one guitar and we're all sitting on the floor, or if it's like a crazy conference setup, as long as it's real. And I think that you spoke to that, and that's very true about a lot of Gen Z. They're so open-minded. They just want to know that what they're part of is authentic.
Yeah, and it changes who they listen to and how they listen, right? Because you know how it is. You're in that group, and I'm around them 24/7. So I was just with my boys out in Phoenix, and I went with one of my sons to his deal, and my son, they're both super engaged leaders, and I just watch who they listen to, and they, if the person is too polished, and if they don't buy it, they're just out. Yeah, you know, they want to know that you're the real deal, and I would say, what a great generation to be set up for the real thing. And I love it because I don't know if it's social media, because you all have had it since you were like born, right? But I feel like it's been so intuitive to you all that you spot fake farther away, right? Yeah. And so what I love is that your generation is kind of hardwired, and you know, you'll have your own challenges. All of our generations do, but you're just hardwired to want the real thing. And there's nothing more real than Jesus. Like, he hates fake. Like, it's his least favorite thing. And so I love it. It's the best. Yeah, I like that. So what advice do you have for young Christians trying to navigate their faith in a culture that is at complete odds with it? Yeah, I'd say, gosh, I have a million things, man. My advice is come over to my house. No. Right. You know, I would say a couple things. You know how to weed out fake, so find some real thing people. So, you know, I feel like everybody needs a couple things. Number one, confidence, that what God gives you is enough. I think that, you know, the challenge of your generation can be you're so hungry for things that you don't recognize that what God's put in front of you is actually what he's given you. So some people are, you know, looking for a mentor that's some kind of influencer, like some guy. Right. And sometimes I'm like, hey, the Lord knows actually that would be terrible for you. Right. Yeah. But he planted that guy and that couple, and I know you don't think they're awesome, but God's going to use them to plant something really beautiful and powerful in you. So just don't misinterpret what's going on right now. The Holy Spirit is planting everything you need right now. Be open to it. But I would say, you know, setting your life up to receive, just to be, you know, we always say, Jesus loves to, universal principle, hungry people get filled in the kingdom. And so Jesus is always looking for somebody who's available, faithful, teachable, and responsive, like after more. Like when your heart is that way and you're like, I just want it. It's funny, he just gives it. Like you're never hungry in the kingdom. Right. And so I think, what's the hunger for? And I think, you know, just saying, Lord, the way to grow is, God, I need a hunger for the word. I really need a hunger for prayer. And I'm not going to settle. I'm not going to settle for like, the only thing we always say with the boys, I'm like, I'll put it like this. I'm like, I am not going to let you be 40-year-old dudes that still can't pray. Like, that's just weird, man. Right. Yeah. You know, and I'm not going to let you be the kind of guy who's never really had, a spiritual, that's not used to having regular, very intentional conversations with your brothers and sisters in the faith. Because, you know, in the kingdom, every young person right now wants a mentor, and I love it. I think it's great. But they're really not good at being brothers and sisters. And what's funny is the biblical model is primarily talking about how much we need brothers and sisters. Because I think mentors like tell you what you need. Right. A brother will come along beside you, or a sister will come alongside you and say, hey, you're being fake. Yeah. Or, hey, that's not who you are. Or, hey, let me help you with that. And so, so many people in your generation are already a little bit isolated. So then they look for a mentor, and then they find out all these things they should be, but they still don't have a brother or a sister to come alongside and like, we just weren't meant to do this alone. So, I think having a brother, digging into the word, prayer, I mean, good night, it's all the same stuff. Right. But I think your generation, I think having genuine brother-sister relationships, for whatever reason, is a little harder for some of you. I don't know why that is. But I would say that I would lean into that. Does that seem fair to you?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So what advice, and this kind of, I think, can play into the last question. Let me give context first.
Yeah.
A lot of people that I interact with that listen to this podcast are either young adults who work at a church or are young adults who like have an idea of what they want to do and it has something to do with ministry. And we actually were just having a discussion about this with some of our young adults on staff like 30 minutes ago. Our church staff is composed of a lot of young adults. And it's several of us who have been at our church or been at a local church for a long time and just knew what we wanted to do and have just been in this same spot volunteering and then eventually got a job doing it. And something that we were talking about is the fact that recently it's kind of become like an aesthetic to work at a church or like an aesthetic to have a job in ministry. And like, I think some social media is like a huge component of that. But even I feel like on a weekly basis, I have conversations with people who want to work in ministry, but then have literally no idea what that actually means. They just, like the idea of being in a Christian environment, which I wish is all that it was, but it's not. So as far as like young people who are thinking about or praying about or trying to find guidance as far as pursuing a career or a life of ministry, what advice or guidance or wisdom would you speak into that?
Yeah. Oh gosh, girl. So here's where my mind goes, and let me back up from there. I am deeply aware that we are running into a supply and demand issue in the church, meaning we will have so many of our church leaders will retire and not be in ministry in the next 10 to 12 years. And there isn't a wave of people on the backside. Right. And so, I hold two things in hand. Like I don't, to your point, what I don't want to do is say, hey, it's really cool to be in ministry and you really ought to do it. And that's how you become a good Christian. It's like, well, because the reality is ministry is really hard. And really, if anybody's in it for very long at all, the aesthetic goes away quick. Right. Because there's a dependency that you need, and there's I would almost say I've spent so many years going, hey man, you can be a Christian anywhere. Let's get you out. Let's get you to leverage your business, leverage your home, which I will do till I die. But I also have this growing, like, I'm almost going to encourage anyone who will say yes. Right. Anybody who would wake up and say, I don't think I could do anything else. I would rather encourage them to go into ministry and allow the Lord to help them figure it out as they get there. Right. Which, by the way, when like your parents and I were going into church, like ministry, it's not like we had it figured out, man. Yeah. My kids are always looking at me and they're like, man, Dad, how did you? And I'm like, I really wish you could meet me as an 18-year-old. Yeah. You would feel so much better about yourself. Yeah. So, I mean, so some of me, it's like, yeah, I don't know that I understood it either. And I had some growing to do, but daggone, man, it is the best yes. One of the best yeses of my life has been just saying yes, because then even though I didn't completely understand it, he just started chipping me away and changing me and shaping me. So I'm quick. I might not be right, Reagan, but I'm quicker to say the second somebody says yes, I'm like, all right, let's go. Yeah, like let's go. Yeah. How do I help you do it? How do I help you have a good heart? How do I help you get past the aesthetic? How do I? Right. Let's fan this thing into flame and let's make sure that you're the real deal in doing this for the rest of your life. But I also understand the danger. I get it. Yeah. 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 I think something that anytime I have a conversation about it is, I think it's something that obviously anyone can do. And that's kind of what we're presented with, even in the gospel is, if there's this idea that Paul entered heaven to the cheers of people that he martyred, right? And I think like that whole idea just proves, it's something that anyone can do. It's a good line, by the way. Thank you. Well done. Yeah, I like that. Thank you.
But I think that something I always try to just like share and something that I try to work on every single day in regard to that is just like teachability. My mom has always said like teachability is the greatest tool. And so anytime, you said Gen Z wants mentors, they want leaders, people that are willing to pour into them. I try so heavily to always surround myself with people that I can just gain wisdom from. I mean, last night you were having a discussion with my dad. I will literally be a fly on the wall. And I just want to listen because I want to get wisdom from what people who have already been through it have to say about it. I want to know, what they can give, what they're willing to share. And so there are so many times I'm not going to say anything, but I'm going to sit and I'm just going to listen because I want to be teachable and I want to have that insight from people who are ahead of me because I don't know.
And I'll encourage you because one of the things that I noticed, because you have so much personality, girl.
Thank you. I try.
And so then, your dad and I are just in your mom too. She was on the conversation. We're just having, which I loved. I told my wife, I just love them. I love hanging out. We can talk about anything. And so we're sitting here talking about the kingdom and everything. And you were so quiet. I was like, wow, Lord, I see you. You know what I'm saying? Like, because those are the marks. And I think, like you said, you breeze in and you're like, let's go. But then all of a sudden I do think that there's something about when that mantle then comes on your shoulders. I think, like in the Old Testament, I think, what was this thing with mantle? Why would they put something on their shoulders? And it's almost like there's this physical representation of a spiritual reality, which is when you step in to say, I want to be, I want to help, lead and shepherd and guide. There's this weight that comes on your shoulders and it forms you.
Yeah.
And now we've seen plenty of arrogant, there's all this stuff.
Right.
But I do think that there are more available, teachable, faithful, responsive people than we know. And I'm always like, just how can I help?
Yeah.
Let's go. How can I help?
Yeah.
How can we get more Reagans? Let's go. Come on.
Well, we're both Regans.
Love it.
So, what is one leadership lesson that you've learned through ministry that you think is crucial for young leaders and young Christians to know? And I think this kind of plays into the two previous questions, but like in regard to specifically leadership, what you do, you lead at a church with a whole lot of people. For someone who specifically is looking to be a leader, what is just a lesson that you've learned that you think is absolutely like if you had one, and I know it's probably hard, you're probably sifting through like a million right now, but if there's just one thing that you wish you could tell yourself at 18.
I think, I'm going to do 1 and 1A. How's that? So
okay, perfect.
The thing that has formed me the most, that has really guarded my heart, is that I've continued, Romans 8:19. I didn't know Romans 8 was a thing. I didn't know that it had changed the world and all the reformations and all the global revivals. I had no clue. I just was reading it. And Romans 8:19 hit me, and I was doing a study with a group, and just it says, creation waits with eager anticipation for the sons of God to be revealed. And when that hit, and the Lord had been prepping the soil of my heart, it dawned on me in that moment. And that hit me when I had already been doing ministry as a young leader for probably 2.5, 3 years. And the worst thing happened that could have possibly happened. You want to guess what it was?
I have no clue.
Everything was awesome. And so like I get there and I look back and I didn't know what I was doing, but all of a sudden, 3 years in and the youth ministry had exploded and we've got all these students come to things. I've got all these dynamic leaders. I've got all this kind of stuff. And I was so busy, man. Like I was so busy. I could barely breathe. And I'm like, I really did. I wanted to be faithful with it. And I wanted to have a good heart with it. But I'm going from like the Sunday, Saturday night, we set everything up. And then I was, at that time, I was either leading worship or preaching at both services. And then I was immediately going out to lunch with all the new people to do that. And then I was immediately coming back to set up to lead worship for college or speak for it. And then we had college age, then we tore down at 11. And then Monday night, they were at the house. And, it was, and Tuesday night and Wednesday. And so everything was so full and I was doing all the right stuff. But as I sat that day under that verse, I was at that place. I literally just read, I'm like the most optimistic person I know, but I'd been in my journal earlier that week and I was just like, Lord, I think I'm doing all this stuff, but I know that I'm going to stand before the one whose eyes blaze like fire, meaning he will see me as I am. And I know me. I was closer to you in college than I am right now, but I'm doing all this stuff. And I was like, at the time I was like, well, maybe I'm just not good at this. Like maybe I'm not cut out for it. And the Lord just spoke into me and just said, hey, Matt, I've never been waiting on your production. I've only been waiting on you to be my boy. Wow. And if you'll just do that, watch what I continue to do with your life. But all of this around you will always be because of this. It's because of your connection to me. It's because of, and I know it's simple, but it's not simple. Yeah. And so, you know, that constant recognition that at any moment that the Father really sees me, and that all of the fruit of my ministry is really dependent on my ability to just be his son and to operate like that. But then also, I think in that, recognizing that that's what I'm passing everywhere. Like I'm not trying to get people in a line for a study. I'm not trying to grow a group. What I'm trying to do is help every man, woman, child I can run into recognize that they've been marked by God, filled with God, and that if they will just be his, I don't need you to perform. I don't need you to, there's nothing I need you to do, but if you will literally just figure out what it means to be his child, you will, your life will just take over. It's just unbelievable. So they're kind of connected. I probably didn't answer that very well, but
no,
that's
it's
how
good.
I feel.
It's good.
Yeah. I think it's the most important thing.
Yeah. So what are some ways that you see the church evolving to meet the needs of young people while not compromising the message of the gospel? So kind of like just some ideas that I had. Recently, a lot of churches in the past few years who had not before have started using like social media as a ministry tool. And at our church, I just moved into working in student ministry, but for about 2.5 years, I was our social media manager. And something that I really pushed that now I'm training into the other people who are doing it now was that our social media was not just an invite tool, but it was its own ministry. So like whatever we're talking about in the church on Sunday morning or on Thursday night, we need to be talking about it on social media. Yeah. We need to be facilitating conversations with people on social media and connecting with people, kind of like navigating our church's spirituality with the people all day, like every day throughout the week, but also like the people that aren't even part of our church, but just follow us because of the stuff we post, like maintaining a community there as well. And that's something that I think has been really cool for my generation, is the ones who maybe don't live in a Christian home and like aren't being taken to church every week. Or just don't have like the means to always be there, still having like a solid community. And I've seen a lot of churches do a really great job of that on social media. I personally follow a ton of churches and I'm like part of their online community and I don't go there, but I just think it's a really cool connecting point. And then like even as far as like teaching methods, I follow a bunch of different youth pastors and pastors, just watching the way that they teach, the way that they're constantly evolving, preaching the same message, but using new methods to be more connected to different audiences. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's all great. That's why you're doing what you're doing. I think that's great. I think the best thing that I've seen the church do, and it's to your point, is to listen to you all talk about this stuff. So for example, these don't count, but I know you're a sneakerhead. So I remember the conversation with my son, I'm preaching all this kind of stuff, and I come out and one of my boys is like, bro, you got to do something about those shoes, man. And I was like, bro, I don't care and everything. He's like, I'm just telling you, anybody my age or anybody remotely, like you're saying more with those shoes than you. And I'm like, well, I'm not this guy. I'm not going to be, And he was like, just tell me how much and let me buy your shoes. This seems like the dumbest thing in the world, right? He gets my shoes. For the next 6 months. All the young guys can, it's like, it opened a door for young guys to talk to me. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me.
Right.
But it's not, that seems like this, but when you listen to the next generation, and I think for one of the challenges of my generation is, we just want to talk to them all the time. And for sure, we want to share and love your posture to listen, but we need to listen too, because when I listen, I figure out how to reach their friends. When I listen, I know how when I listen, because I'm like, dude, TikTok is ridiculous. It's just dumb. And he's like, this is this is my stream. They're not all streams are the same. And this is why it's hilarious. And this is why I'm like, oh, we do need laughter. And we do like, I needed to hear them. And when I do that, I'm like, oh,
yeah,
I get that. And the more I do that, the more it opens the door because I'm like, oh yeah, I get that is funny. Yeah. That is funny. Yeah. Those do matter. Like that. Yeah. And when I do that, when I listen, to the next generation, then it's just opening this massive door for all their friends. And that's all I care about. Yeah. All I care about is their friends. I just want their friends to know Jesus. Yeah. And they are so much. I've never seen the gospel spread quicker than in that generation right now. Yeah. It's the most fun. Yeah. It's so fun.
I think it's cool. It's also really confusing because Gen Z has like the strangest humor and like the strangest interests. Yeah. And so true. Like I'm part of it. And so like when I'm with,
still think it's weird. Yeah.
I think it's weird, but I also understand why it's popular. And so when I'm with adults, I'm like, oh, kids these days. Yeah. But then I am that. And so like when I do student ministry, if a deacon or like one of the pastors walks in, I'm like, please no, because I know that whatever I'm about to say to them, it's going to be life-changing. To you, it's going to be weird. Yeah. And I'm always terrified because I'm like, see, you're going to think that what I'm saying is absolutely crazy, but to them, it's going to make sense.
Yeah. I tell youth pastors all the time, one of the big failures you can do is to preach to your adults. Yeah. Because you know, at some point you start caring about all the adults and what they say. And I'm like, look, I'm almost 50 years old. Yeah. But I'm going to try, if I'm with young men and women, I'm going to try to teach a message that you will not like and probably won't get. Yeah. And if you don't get it, I might have just won. Yeah. And so, but it's listening. Like, you know, I remember being, so my mentor, guy that poured into me more than anything, we would go places and he would sit in the front row of everything I did and take notes. And I'm like, bro, yeah, you're like, you have more in your pinky than I have in my own body. But he would just sit there and go, oh man, I love what you did. Man, when'd you pull that out? And he genuinely listened to me like all the time. And he's like, oh, that's what. And I'm like, wow, I want to be that dude. Man. Yeah. I want to be in the front row. And so we take all these college groups to Israel and all these different things. And I do like, first I did it as a principal. I'd sit in the front row and just take notes. And then I'm like, no. Like your generation is literally seeing the gospel in a way that is challenging me and making me think differently. I love it. And I'm like doing this and they're like, you do. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, I'm just putting myself in that same spot. And so I think listening is a big deal.
Yeah, I agree. This one's a little bit aside from like the, you know, young adults and Gen Z in church idea and more just like as a church leader. And this is just something that I'm always curious about as far as like church culture, is how do you guys work and strive toward maintaining a good culture in such a large church with, I'm assuming, multiple campuses?
Yeah. So, you know, we're not the only ones and there's bigger and all that, but yeah, we have, you know, depending on how you count, you know, kind of 15, 16 campuses and this, that, and the other, and lots of pastors and stuff. And so, you know, one of the phrases that we, Kyle, you know, my friend that is the senior pastor there, one of the things we started talking about when we started looking at like the next run of the church and everything was this phrase kept popping and it was just one at a time. And it was like, if we do this and it's about the masses, we're going to be in trouble. But if everybody who comes and every leader who comes is always thinking about the one, you know, and we had done, you know, kind of a study through the gospel and just found how many times he's got massive crowds, he's discipling people, but daggone, especially in John, it's just like, but he just always had time. He was interruptible and yet sometimes not interruptible. And how do you do that? And so, you know, I think, you know, we just had to almost create some culture mantras that would allow people to not get like sucked in the crowd and just say, so a couple of things we were like, you know, number one, you know, we started talking about our job is to unleash you. And so it was like the forming of a vision statement. And so we also think that that it's not bad to be big. So that can kind of creep in sometimes. And it's like when you start thinking,
sorry,
you're good.
Oh my goodness. I was trying not to cough.
I was kind of raised thinking big churches were bad.
Yeah.
And so, but I just started looking through data and this kind of, all kinds of stuff. And they can be, because they can get you on the wrong thing. It can end up being ego and personality, but that's on the leadership. That can happen in a small church too.
Yeah.
But we just started recognizing that for us, at least, it gave us an opportunity to give a larger percentage of everybody's dollars out the door. It did create like a culture. I always say, I don't feel like I go to a big church. I feel like I live in a small town. Like it just feels like a small town, and nobody's perfect there either. And so we just started thinking, okay, we've got every person that we meet, our job is to unleash them. Like Jesus planted something in them. They need to know him, but then they need to figure out who they are so they can help us in that full force. So we came up with a phrase. It was like, we want to unleash the full force of the church to love people one at a time. And so we just say it all the time. And we're like, hey, the only reason we're here is because we want to unleash the full force. We want to unleash, all of us have different giftings, abilities, but we wanted to do it together in a way that's impactful. So we are part of the Christian church tribe, a lot of non-denominational church. You know, my least favorite thing about our independent church movement? What? They're so independent.
Yeah.
It's like trying to get them together is like herding cats.
Yeah.
And it's like there's so much to be done in the world that it's more than what our little churches can do on their own. There's always something bigger. And we have to keep the Big C church in mind, and we got to make sure that we're funding her and helping her and serving her and multiplying for her. And so, so I think the culture has to be, you have to hold those ideals. We call them mantras. We have to hold them very high and just say, no, this is who we are. We have to say a lot, which I think everybody should do this. Just this is who we are, and this is why we exist. And it's okay to be big. But only if we're going to continue to love people one at a time. So, and it's hard. But I would tell you, I worked at a church of like, 300. I've worked at a church of like 3,000, and I've worked at our church, and I swear to you, it's not that different. Because even for us, we don't really think. I mean, I don't think about anything outside of our walls. Yeah. I'm thinking about my neighbor who doesn't know Jesus. I'm thinking about the guy from Planet Fitness. I'm thinking about my son's, friend that's on the back deck that just slept with his girlfriend. And we also do stuff with the church. Right. And so I don't know that it feels different, but you probably need to make sure that you guard your heart, because I know that can be a thing.
For sure. I like that. So my last question, and this one, I think it's not really geared toward Gen Z, but I think it is important for Gen Z, because this is one I'm genuinely curious about. I'll ask the question, then I'll explain, because it's hard to explain until I ask. But in the church today, progressivism is kind of a broad term, and it seems like it has become, just from what I've seen, more so in recent years. And it can be seen as anything from like not preaching in a suit to accepting like transgenderism in your teaching. Right. And so my question is, how do you differentiate between being in a church that pursues biblical clarity and not falling prey to legalism or progressivism? Because something that I've seen a lot recently, and we talked about this on our last season as well, is just a lot of confusion. And, with young people, it's a lot of like biblical illiteracy that leads to confusion. And so, I've had various questions just over the last few weeks. We did a series with our students called Asking for a Friend, where we put up an anonymous poll. They asked any question, and we week by week addressed them. Yeah. And it was just a continuing series until every question had been answered. And so with our students, we went on this deep dive of all these questions, and we were answering questions about addiction, about the LGBTQ community, about heaven and hell, just all kind of just like broad ideas, topics, and we were just taking them week by week and addressing them. And so many students, there were students who talked about gay lifestyles, had never heard that anything in the Bible said anything that was not pro that. Yeah. There were students that genuinely believed that if you had turned to that lifestyle, you were going to hell and you couldn't do anything to change it. I actually had a student who firmly had a theory and discussed it with me that hell and heaven both don't exist. That haunted houses on earth are where people go when they die, and that's where their ghosts are. And so we had to like...
That is wildly specific.
Very. Wow. And so we were having a discussion, and I was like, that is, still as a leader, wow, that's such crazy theory you've come up with. Thank you for sharing that with me. Let's talk about, she's like, well, the Bible doesn't tell us anything about hell. I was like, well, so let's backtrack. And we still have that relational equity where they're comfortable sharing these crazy concepts with me and but we're going to talk about it. Yeah. But I think that it's kind of because of a lack of biblical literacy with so many young people now because of kind of like a decline. But how do you manage still holding true to what the Bible says about very serious topics, but not just being like legalistic?
Good night. I hope your generation figures this out. I think, maybe it's always been this way because, reading the church fathers, and I'm a history nerd, there's always a drift away from the gospel. And so, there will always be people who try to get the gospel to say what they actually just want. And then there's culture that's born around that, that reinforces it. And then, you need the Lord to consistently woo you back. But, I think the best that I can do is, when I was, so I think of the church like parenting. I probably shouldn't, it's probably not this simple, but I remember getting into parenting and just being like, the kids were little, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, and how do you, and what if they this, and how do I teach them, and people had like books and they had manuals and all this kind of stuff, and I was so overwhelmed with how am I going to teach my kid everything they need to know by the time they're 18 and them not be tyrants. And I had a friend of mine, and I was kind of telling him about this. He's older than me, and he said, can I tell you something? I was like, yeah. He's like, you need to chill out. I was like, tell me about that.
Right.
And he was like, Jesus spent 3.5 years with his guys. And because he did that, he didn't need a manual.
Right.
And he said, so much of what you want to plant in your kids will be true if that's who you are. And so he's like, so here's the deal, Matt, if you love the word and you really take it seriously and you just want to read every square inch of it and you just keep being nerdy about it, your kids are going to love scripture. And you know what, if you really grow in prayer and you really like grow through and you keep maturing in prayer, and if you you're going to reproduce what you are. And so I would say there's all these checks and balances within the church, and what's it going to do and what's it going to be, and the history of the first bishop and why that happened, and how do you avoid that again, and how do we get back to really what God designed. But I think the best thing we have is for Reagan to really, you're your age and you already see it. Why? Because you've been invested in, because you have a hunger for the word. I think that I think that every generation thinks the next generation isn't going to figure the word out to the degree that we have. But here we are.
Right. Yeah.
And you're a pretty smart girl.
Thank you.
And so I think we get nervous when every new trend is off topic of the gospel, and it's always a new challenge. And it seems like, the whole church is going to go, and it's going to, but then even now in culture, like 5 years later, most people are like, that takes all of us to a dark place. And there's this return back to, I guess there is some wisdom in God's word. And so I guess, when it comes to all those progressive issues, I think we have to be careful not to make rules based on slippery slopes. Here's what I would say. I think sometimes we come up with rules and we make them sound like church, even though it's not what Jesus said. I'll use one like, don't drink. It could be very wise. And actually, I don't really. But that's not a rule.
Right.
And so, some people are like, but we can't let them do that because then they might get drunk. And I'm like, so then just disciple them.
Right. Yeah.
But I think in church world, we want to come up with rules to fix the system instead of trusting that it's actually only discipleship that'll get us there. And so I think we do that with lots of things. We do that with sex things, and we don't talk enough about things. But I'd say, women and women's roles right now, I'm like, do your best at defining where Jesus lands. And then don't worry about slippery slopes. Yeah. Stand on the rock. Like he said this, we're going to do this.
Right.
Well, what about, I don't know, we're just going to do this.
Yeah.
And do that to the best of your ability. Recognize that you're going to mature over time. Your dad and I were talking about this last night. And then trust that who you're becoming is impacting the church more than you know.
Yeah.
And a bigger megaphone or platform God might use it, but he'll use our whole life even more. So I don't know that we can guard against it, because past this one, it's going to be another one. You go back into the 70s, it was this thing. You go into the 1500s, the 1400s. But he just always keeps raising a generation up to go back into the Word, back to find out what he's really planned. He enables them with his Spirit, gives them grace. And he just does what he does. So I just don't think we can control it. That's probably a terrible answer, but
no, it was good.
It's
good. Yeah. So I usually close our episodes with people giving themselves a little bit of a shout out or a plug. But first I want to say thank you for making time and being willing to come on.
Absolutely.
I'm super excited for everyone to hear this conversation and, just all of the insight that we can get from it. But are there any platforms or ways that people can connect with you outside of this?
Yeah. I see my boys would be all about this. And a lot of people are trying to get me to do more of this stuff. Southeast Christian Church, I do a lot of the content for like groups and all that kind of stuff, and then I also preach there on weekends. And so, if any of that blesses somebody, it's great.
Cool.
I've got some things on Right Now Media. I did a Israel trip, and the team that I took, even bigger than what I say, it's just visually gorgeous. And it gives we did all these drone shots before they canceled them all and said we couldn't do it, and it's just gorgeous. But yeah, the Southeast is my home, man. I love the local church, will till the day that I die. And so most of, I've done tons of just group series and Bible study series that are on there. So
cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Remember to follow Real Life Theology for future episodes and connect with me at the Regan Grace, or just check out ReganGraceGibbs.com. Until next time, be blessed.